In this video, I want to talk about 3D sketches. 3D sketches, I think, are largely misunderstood. They're a little bit more difficult than 2D sketches, but there's so much more power that's available in them. I want to first run through a couple of examples of places where I've used 3D sketches in the past, and then take you through the process of working with 3D sketches and see some of the things that you can actually do. The most basic thing that most people do with 3D sketches is for frames, tubing, wires, hoses, this sort of thing. You can put wires inside of a sheet metal box, or you can just lay out a frame, which is what I've done here. The 3D sketch is essentially the layout for this table, and we'll come back and recreate something like this a little bit later. Let's take a look at some other things. The dune buggy here is a great example of things that you can do with a 3D sketch. There's a couple levels of things that I've done with the 3D sketch here. First, and probably the most familiar, is the frame. And this was used in conjunction with sweeps to make the tubular frame. Also, the body of the buggy used several 3D sketches to help get this shape, and there was something going on with the tires as well that helped me get the paddles on there. We can get rid of the distracting reflections on the floor by going to the display manager and right-clicking on the scene and getting rid of those floor reflections. Here you can see the 3D sketch. I drew in all of the lines, and there's several ways to put in dimensions for the endpoints, but we use sketch relations and dimensions. One of the best things about a 3D sketch is it allows you to sketch wherever you want, and you don't have to have a list of 2D sketches. When you have a list of 2D sketches, you have to work with history, and so you can't make relations between the first one and the last one. You have to make them from the last one back to the first one, so you have to be careful about the order in which you make your sketches. But with a 3D sketch, you can make relationships in any direction because everything's in the same sketch, and there is no history. This frame was created as a weldment that allowed me to use some of the features of the weldment type along with some already configured pipe profiles. But we've got a couple of different 3D sketches in here because the first one is for the frame and the second one was for some of the suspension. So that's a very powerful and common usage of 3D sketches. Here's another usage. We've taken a couple of curve features, starting with a helix and then a flat spiral, and have created a composite curve. And this composite curve uses some model edges, these two model edges, a 2D sketch, and that's this part of the total curve, and then also a 3D sketch, which is a spline that allows us to get from a flat sketch up to a different level. You can also use the convert entities on the sketch toolbar to convert curve entities into 3D spline shapes, and then these can be edited from there. These curves represent wires or tubes or hoses or whatever you want them to represent. You can work with these in 3D sketches. And let's show that right here. We're going to open a new 3D sketch. And in this sketch, we're going to use Convert Entities. Click on the composite curve, and then click on Convert Entities. And then I can hide all of the other entities. Let's take a look at how to do that. Hide everything, including the solid body up here. All right, now all I have is 3D sketch. And it's fully defined because it's connected to the curve entities which made it up. So what I can do to make this editable, if you'd want to do this, you can select the item and go over here in the existing relations and just kill that on-edge relationship. Okay, now we have an underdefined spline, but it's kind of frozen. So to unfreeze it, I'm going to right click and select Convert to Spline tool. And what this should do is add a bunch of control points to it. So now instead of having a fully defined spline that's stuck in space or an underdefined spline that you can't do anything with, now you can grab any point on this and move it around. So if you've got a piece of wire that needs to be bent in a specified way, but one section of it is a little bit off, this is a great way to do it. This was another crazy shape, and I used a lot of 3D Sketch on this. But the main thing that I want you to see right away is that the whole layout was created with a 3D Sketch. This helped me understand where different features of the chair were going to lie, and I could lay out the proportions of the chair right up front before I had to do any crazy surfacing type work. In this example, again, I've used the 3D Sketch for several different things. The first thing is the frame of the pressure washer. If I open this up, we can see that there is a sweep created, and that sweep was swept along a 3D Sketch. Notice also that this was a symmetrical part, so the 3D Sketch only had to go halfway around. And then some additional gussets and tubes and plates were welded on here. We've got some sheet metal and some wire-formed rings. The other thing that was used was actually this hose. And if we open this up, the hose had to connect to a couple of different places, and it had to wrap around several times. So each one of these lofts was created with a 3D Sketch as the guide curve. That helps squeeze all of the hose on there and helped make it look more realistic. From an engineering point of view, it also helps you know what length of hose you can wrap onto the frame set up as it is. Real hose may not look exactly like this, but it comes close enough to give us a length estimate. So these are several of the uses of 3D sketches that you might run into in an engineering capacity, but there are also some industrial design type applications. We've already looked at the chair and how complex the surfacing was on that. A lot of 3D sketches went into that. Also, this pair of sunglasses made use of 3D sketches every now and then. This particular 3D sketch was a sketch on a surface, and that allows you to just draw whatever kind of shape you want on a complex surface. And in this case, it allows me to trim out the lens of the glasses. Thanks for watching part 1 of 3D Sketch. Come back for part 2.